What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. Now, I think we all know that, of course, last week Sony and Polyphony Digital made a bit of a slip up by accidentally pretty much leaking the entire trailer of Gran Turismo 7 update 1.59 onto the PlayStation Home. Now, thanks to this mistake, we know all four cars that are coming alongside the game with 1.59. That is the Corvette Z06, the Ferrari 812 Superfast, the Suzuki Carry, and of course the Honda CR-V. Now, in terms of these cars, how am I going to go about ranking cars that aren't already in the game? Well, I'm going to take my prior knowledge of these types of cars being added to GT7, some of the possible engine swaps and customization options, put it all together and come up with a ranking from there. Then, once the cars are fully released, I've reviewed them and spent enough time with them, I'll then make a definitive ranking list and go back and compare with this one. So let's begin the list then with what I believe will be the weakest car of update 1.59. In fourth and last place, I have the Honda CR-V eHev X Black Edition. What a mouthful that is, and honestly, as a Honda fanboy, this one hurts. However, admittedly, it's probably one of the least interesting Hondas to ever exist, especially in my personal opinion. Now, admittedly, if this had been the original CR-V, which I believe released in like 1995, it would have been pretty cool. It did start off as a very sort of quirky idea all the way back then. Just unfortunately, since then, they pretty much put weight on every single time to the point that it just looks like a big rolling block. And in terms of this specific model, I did try and do some research on it, and I'm not sure if it's just limited to the Japanese market, but every time I looked up this vehicle, it just gave me back Japanese websites or Japanese YouTube videos. So unfortunately, I don't speak fluent Japanese, so it was quite difficult to get the specifics on this specific model. Now, from what I can gather, it's around about 200 plus brake horsepower, four-wheel drive, so there on the surface, it doesn't look too bad. But unfortunately, I'm 99% sure this is a hybrid variant, and as you can see around the Honda badge there, it does have this sort of blue hue to it. So unfortunately, I think that pretty much confirms this is going to be a hybrid, and unfortunately that will probably mean it has a CVT transmission, it will never get a manual swap, and it will never get an engine swap, and unfortunately it's going to be stuck with one single gear, I believe, and really that's going to kind of be the nail in the coffin for it there, as it just doesn't transfer well from the real world to the digital world in Gran Turismo 7. They're notoriously bad. I don't believe this will be kind of bad on the level as the Toyota was back in January, but I definitely don't feel like it'll be able to rival the Mazda, which actually did have some nice customization options and some decent performance if you started slapping the parts on. Unfortunately, I don't think the CR-V will be anywhere near, and it will kind of sit in this middle of the road category where it's not as bad as a Toyota, but cannot then match a similar vehicle such as the Mazda. Okay, in at third place, and I know this is going to trigger a lot of people, I have the Ferrari 812 Superfast. Now, there's a good reason for this. On the surface, this is an incredible addition. It's one that's been on the data mined list ever since it released in 2022, and it's only took them just over 3 years to actually put it in game. And for me personally, I'm incredibly excited to see it. Unfortunately, I'm incredibly wary when a hyped car like this actually gets released, and all we need to do is look back to how Polyphony have treated supercar editions in GT7 previously. Yes, they are incredibly cool, yes, they are great in VR and they're fast vehicles, but unfortunately they do tend to lack a lot of the customization and performance options to get them built up properly. Now, I think this is a very obvious one, but I don't believe the 812 Superfast will ever get a race type engine swap, and unfortunately for the car itself, that is really going to affect its usability. Typically, these very high powered supercar type vehicles are only really useful in sprint type races, meaning that if you want to go ahead, grind some money with it, or just use it in longer races with fuel and tyre wear and such, it's going to be almost entirely useless. And unfortunately, because of that, I do feel it's going to be incredibly limited in how we can go about using it, and really the length of time that people use it for. Again, I think this is an incredibly hyped up addition to the game, finally coming after over 3 years. I think it could be absolutely incredible, and I'll probably be blown away by the performance, by the way it feels in VR, and the sound and the sight of it. But unfortunately, in terms of long-term use, I think once that kind of initial excitement of using this car in GT7 has past, it will then probably fade away like a lot of the other supercars tend to do quite quickly. I definitely feel in a lot of other racing games, if this was an update for those type of games, then this could have been right up there as number one. But again, applying Polyphony's previous logic when they've added these type of vehicles, I'm going to be extremely cautious here and try and not get too hyped up about this seriously cool bit of kit. Alright, in at number 2, I've got the Suzuki Carry KC. Of course, we do finally have a K-Truck in Gran Turismo 7, and of course that's not the main reason I'm putting that there, because that would be personal bias. I've been waiting for one of these things forever. Whilst it's not quite the Daihatsu midget, it still looks like it could be an absolute hoot. Now the main thing I'm thinking here is the typical Polyphony logic. These meme type vehicles or weird and random type cars do typically get some pretty wacky engine swaps. Let's take the Honda Beat for example, the Suzuki Cappuccino as well. These type of vehicles do typically end up with some of the best engine swaps in game. And when it comes to the Suzuki Carry KC, there's a few possible options. The first is the Suzuki Swift engine, which unfortunately I would say would be the most boring swap they could do, and it would knock it back below the 812 Superfast. But looking at the others, there's the possibility of the Suzuki VGT engine or the Suzuki VGT Group 3 engine. Now I believe both of those are the Hayabusa bike engine. Now of course, if it does end up being the VGT Group 3 engine swap, then that's absolutely fantastic. You then get race fuel efficiency and of course the ridiculous performance of a Hayabusa slapped in a Suzuki Carry K-Truck, which is just absolutely bonkers to think about. And looking at the Polyphony logic when it comes to these type of vehicles, that doesn't seem too far-fetched. Overall, if they get this one right, it could be an absolute blast in GT7. Alright, was there really any doubt? The Chevrolet Corvette Z06 C5 generation makes my first place on what I believe will be the best car of the update. Now my main reason isn't because it's going to be incredibly hyped and a lot of people have been asking for this car for the longest time and it's kind of come out of nowhere, not being on any of the data mine lists or anything. But at the end of the day, the Corvette is a tried and true formula, and we now have the complete set. In fact, the majority of the Corvettes in-game are incredibly usable, incredibly buildable, and I think this one will be no different whatsoever. For me, when it comes to these sort of generations of Corvettes, so like the C5, the C6, it was really the proper time of sort of Viper versus Corvette, and I think that was an incredibly cool time to sort of witness, especially in the sort of earlier days of the internet. People talking about them in forums and which one they preferred and stuff, and then of course YouTube came around and you see the comment section flooded with the Corvette's better or the Viper's better. And for me, the C5 sort of signifies that era of sort of American sports cars or muscle cars where, you know, you had two huge vehicles, the Corvette and the Viper, going head to head together, and we can finally, you know, recreate that. Not to mention the full lineup of Corvettes is now fully complete, and when it comes to racing games, really the C5 has sort of dropped off for the C6, especially in sort of more recent games. Then you've got the C7, of course the C8 is starting to show its face in racing games now. So overall, the C5 feels like a bit of a forgotten gem from a time past. In the early 2000s, you'd see this car in almost absolutely every racing game, and typically it would be put up against the Viper GTS. So to see it return and be able to sort of relive those moments in Gran Turismo 7, as well as a car that will probably follow in the footsteps of the rest of the Corvettes, be highly customizable, incredibly powerful, and incredibly usable, makes this my easy pick for the probably best car of this update. But as mentioned, this is purely just predictions using the logic that Polyphony will typically put forward when it comes to these type of vehicles being added. But let me know what you think. What's your pre-ranking of all four of the new cars coming this Thursday to GT7? And again, once I've reviewed them all, tested them all in their entirety, I'll go back to this list and compare my final rankings versus this one. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.